أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وارزقنا فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين اللهم افتح إلينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah what I want to do today is to start with the text of Abu Zaid al-Balqi, and I'm only going to do the introduction, so not the introduction, the first chapter as a sort of a segue into the rest of the course that we'll be looking at. And I'm sure most of you have the text that is translated by Dr. Malik. So I'll be reading off the text. I'm not going to do the Arabic sections, inshallah, so that it's just easier to for everyone to follow along. But I might touch on a couple of Arabic sections here and there just to further expand or elaborate what exactly he's saying, because Abu Zaid is one of those scholars whose literary prowess is very sophisticated and very brief. Means he's one of those writers who can condense a lot of information in very few words. So if you actually look at the original manuscript, it's a very short manuscript. Just like when we look at Ghazali, it's a very short manuscript, but we can really sit and expand, for hours on that. And there have been commentaries that have been written on some of these texts that they can go into volumes. So, one phrase that he might use might contain multiple meanings, and all of those meanings would be valid insofar as what he wants to convey out of that. So I'll touch very briefly on some sections if I ever come across them, or if they require further elaboration, inshallah ta'ala. So Abu Zaid was born Ahmad ibn Sahal in the city of Balkh, which is still there. It's for those of you who know, it's in Afghanistan. At that time, it was part of Greater Khorasan, and so hence his title Al-Balkhi. He's from Balkh, and he was born in the early 3rd century of Hijr, 235, 236 thereabouts. So he's one of the early generations of the scholars in our tradition. And he was a student of Al-Kindi. And Al-Kindi was also one of the first philosophers in our tradition. Now, Al-Kindi's philosophy was peripatetic philosophy, for those of you who know how the different categorizations are. So his philosophy was really Aristotelian in nature. But Al-Balkhi was a student of many other disciplines as well. In mathematics, in astronomy, in geography, in psychology is something that he also developed, but it was still being studied at that time. Physiology and a multiple of other disciplines, including tafsir, hadith, and fiqh. So he was what you would call a polymath scholar, and all this comes in to show his genius and the way he analyzes things, the way he groups them, the way he categorizes them and presents them. So you can see here that his prowess in psychology falls under philosophy as it was originally studied. And his language is philosophical. He focuses a lot on the thought of the human being in presentation of the psychology of the human being. And he elaborates how those emotions and feelings and sensations, the ups and downs that the person goes through, how they can ultimately be traced back to the thought process of the human being, and how the individual can diagnose themselves and then therapeutically, go through the process of healing by themselves without the need of an external intervention. In general cases, in specific cases of illnesses, you require an external individual to diagnose and treat. And they say he wrote close to 60 different works, publications in all these fields. and he established a school of map making, which is very interesting in Balkh. He established a school of geographical map making. So this is something that, I mean, today we don't really give this any thought or regard, but if you have ever done cartography, I've done cartography for some of my works. I made my own maps for the fantasy books that I wrote. It's a very interesting endeavor to understand topology of a landscape and how, you know, different, because the human being cannot actually see the whole map the way we can see it today, the whole world. You can't see it today from a bird's eye view to know exactly where the line goes. So this is something that at that time it required an incredible amount of mathematical calculations and surveying of a landscape, you see. And it was a profession. Map making was a profession. So you could actually study to become a map maker, because these were a people now at that time who would, you know, there were other civilizations that they would explore, they would travel to, and then there were also things like trade routes established between different places. So maps were, an integral thing. It was a necessity. You know, I mean, it's still a necessity even today, but at that time you would go to a map maker and purchase a map, a physical map. So it's very interesting that this is the thing that he ended up establishing, because there's a certain discipline that goes into map making. So the book that he wrote is titled Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus, Sustenance of the Bodies and the Souls. And it's a two-part book. The first part is with regards to physiology, the body, and then the second part is with regards to the psychology of the human being. So what we're going to be looking at is the second book, inshallah. And so I'll just start reading from the... Now, you'll see, inshallah, when we also go into Ghazali's text, there's a certain categorization of the human being, internal, the feelings of things like anxiety and depression. Abu Zaid al-Balkhi was the one who introduced the categorization of depression. He said that there are 4 different types of depression, and he's going to expand on these more as well. And then there is something called neurosis. Now, neurosis is, it's pretty vague. It's not specific. In fact, the American manual, the DSM, removed neurosis or neurotic behavior from their manual because it was too vague. It was not specific. You can't, because everyone experiences it. Everyone experiences neurosis in some degree or another. I did mention this before, that everyone has some sort of compulsion or disorder or complexity or obsession, and everyone has this in different degrees, and most people are within a tolerable range, whereas others have crossed that range and, you know, it's become like a permanent disease in them. So this is something important to understand, that the human being, you know, you have a range of tolerance. Every soul has a range of tolerance. It's like a spectrum. And a newborn, a new soul that enters into this world enters at the precise balance of this spectrum. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ said, that every child is born on the fitrah. And that's what fitrah is. Fitrah is the balance. It's the raw nature. It's untouched by this material realm. And so the fitrah is what determines the balance of the individual. Can you, I don't know. Anyway. The fitrah is what determines the balance of the individual. The lights keep flickering in here. I don't know why. Then the human being, as he progresses through life, and we'll look at this more when we come to the lives of man, inshallah. As he progresses through life, the range of tolerance extends bit by bit. Because through the stresses, like stress is something that tests the elasticity of a thing in physics. So you keep stretching something and keep on applying stress on it until it breaks, right? So the human being sort of goes through this elasticity of expansion and contraction until his range of tolerance can be increased. That's what life is supposed to do for you. That's what you're supposed to go through in terms of your entrainment. How much can you endure? How much can you sustain? How well can you progress forward? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, so that we can determine which one of them is the best in their deeds, in their actions, because they go through this elongation. Every soul goes through this. But there is now a threshold on that spectrum. There is that range whereby it reaches a point whereby the human being, by his very nature, can no longer endure. This threshold is where it's also got its own spectrum on either side, right? And when you cross the threshold, it becomes a matter of being unable to come back. So people do cross the threshold. People do experience certain events in their lives where, it really hits them. Like a traumatic incident, it hurts, like psychologically hurts, and it puts them in a state, a stasis of, it's just, they're lost for a moment, right? That's them now beginning to enter the threshold. And the longer they endure in the threshold, it becomes a matter whereby if they don't pull back, or they're not assisted in being pulled back, they will end up crossing the threshold into an extremity, and then that becomes, permanent damage, irreversible. Like the event horizon in physics, when you look at a black hole, it has an event horizon with the immense force of gravity that pulls all the objects into the hole. When you cross the event horizon, it's no longer possible to come back out because the pull is so strong. That's essentially it. Like once you cross that threshold, it's very difficult to come back. And this is when insanity then prevails. Now that doesn't mean that the individual is gone and there is no possibility for them to come back, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fa'alun lima yurid. He can do whatever He wills, and He can intervene whenever He wants to, and He can reverse that effect in the human being. And that's if the human being is himself, it wasn't something they did unto themselves. This is the thing. If you did this to yourself, then you cannot lament on why God is not saving you. Anyway, different discussion. The point I was trying to make is that Abu Zaid brought about a categorization of neurosis. And he categorized it into 4. And these 4 you will see when we expand into Ghazali's text about the shahwa, the ghadab, and the aql, and then the unification of all those 3. You will understand how they actually fit in. So he spoke about khawf and faza'a. And khawf is fear. And faza'a is like your panic, a state of anxiety. It's agitation. This is the unification of a complete imbalance in the human being. When the shahwa, the ghadab, the aql are in complete imbalance, together they will put the being in a state of fear and anxiety or panic. And then you've got the ghadabiyya, which is to do with your anger and aggression. And then you've got your huzn and jaza'a. And huzn is your sadness, and jaza'a is your depression. That's to do with your shahwa. And then you've got the waswasa. And waswasa are the obsessions and the compulsions, and that are to do with the aqaliyah. I'm not going to get too deep into that right now. Inshallah, when we come to Ghazali's text, you'll understand these better. So when the 3 are in harmony, the aql, the shahwa, the ghadab, you have adala, you have justice. And when they're off balance, you have an injustice. And that injustice produces this state of fear and anxiety and panic. So Abu Zaid is the one who actually started categorizing all these. And if you examine yourself, you will be able to determine what exactly is it that you are encountering. Is it fear? Is it panic? Is it depression? Is it sadness? Are you having obsessions over things? Are there compulsions that are driving towards something? And then you will be able to diagnose and say, oh, okay, so this is the reason. It's because my shahwa is a bit overinflated or depleted, or my ghadab is too high or too low, or my aql is overactive, right? You'll be able to diagnose it better, inshallah. Now, neurosis, sorry, I wanted to explain that a little bit. Neurosis is an inability to adapt to change. That's what it is as a definition. It's an inability to adapt to changing circumstances. So there's a certain tolerance that an individual has, and as far as human nature is concerned, they may have more tolerance, but they've only been able to grasp this much. And so when they are hit by changing circumstances in life, they find that they're unable to adapt to those circumstances, and then they end up in this stasis mode of neurosis. They either fear or depression or this, that, or the other. They puts them into the stasis because their range of endurance has not really been entrained to adapt to more. That's what neurosis is, and which is usab in the Arabic terminology. Al-usab or asaba means to. Asaba actually means nerves. It actually means nerve. One of the meanings of the word asaba is nerves. So when you say you're getting on my nerves, or my nerves are jittery, that's you're in a state of neurosis in that regard. You're feeling this because there's something new that's happening. Maybe you're not adapted to it. Somebody who's coming up on stage to speak for the first time, and they start getting butterflies in the stomach. My nerves are on edge. I'm nervous. That's essentially it. You're in a state of neurosis because you've not actually, it's the first time you're encountering this circumstance in your life, and you haven't fully adapted to it. It's not about confidence and self-esteem. You just haven't been able to adapt to it. Confidence and self-esteem, that's what these people talk about. The secularists, this is their diagnosis. You see, you need to build your confidence. Yes, you do need to do all that. Build your confidence, charisma and all that. But the real cause of that's the symptom of it. Just the real cause of it is because you're in a state of neurosis. That's really essentially what it is. So let's get into the first section of the text, the first chapter. Now, so I'm just going to read out the English, and whenever I come across any of the section that I feel needs a bit more elaboration, I'll break it down the Arabic. So he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, my second essay or part of this book, which is the Sustenance of the Soul, falls into 8 chapters. The first chapter is on elucidating the need for promoting the sustenance of the soul. The second is on endeavoring to keep perpetuating the health of the soul. So you see the breakdown that he's giving you in terms of the chapters and the categorization is he's taking you step by step. So by the time you complete the whole thing, you understand exactly what to do. So the first thing is to understand elucidating the need for promoting the sustenance of the soul. What is the importance of giving mental health a priority? And then it is on endeavoring to keep perpetuating the health of the soul. The third chapter is to make an effort to bring back the healthy condition of the soul, because there are 2 parts of it. One is to maintain the state of soundness that you're in. The other is to fix when that state of soundness is in an imbalance. So when something life is not the status quo doesn't remain standard throughout life. This is a false conception or perception of life. To think that if things are normal now, they will maintain their normality. A lot of people get into this mode, and it's a delusionally mode, because it will be upset. Or you've got a nice job, the house is there, everything, the car, bank balance, everything is going smooth. And then you assume that that's going to be the next 40 years. I'm good, set, nothing to worry about, which is a false perception of life, because then the hurdles start coming in and it upsets everything. You see, so what he's saying is you need to now, first of all, if you find the position of stability, you need to work towards maintaining that stability. Internal stability, not as far as, my house and my car and all that. Internal stability. And then when there is an agitation that occurs, you need to learn how to diagnose that and then bring it back to normalcy, to heal yourself. The fourth is on specifying and classifying the psychological symptoms, which is your diagnosis, and enumerating them. The fifth is on suppressing anger and rage and obliterating them. So the anger and rage, that's your ghadab. Because that's the one thing that, you see, as far as your shahwa is concerned, shahwa is timid. Shahwa is like, it's very, it's slippery. But ghadab, shahwa can be regulated, especially when what you want just cannot be in your way, in your path. Your desire just is not attainable. And ultimately you have to face that reality. But the problem with the ghadab, once it's triggered, the damage that follows is irreversible. So that's really the first thing that you need to focus on, because the shahwa in human nature will always try to employ the ghadab when the aql does not respond. See, when the self wants something, desires something, and rationality tells you it's not good for you, leave it. But then the shahwa is strong and it realizes there's no other way I can get it, it will employ the use of the ghadab, you see. And so you see this in children. The child says, I want this, I want this, I want this, and the parent says, from a rational perspective, no, 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 it's not good for you, no. Then guess what happens? The ghadab kicks in, and then the child now throws a tantrum. The screaming, the shouting, the yelling, the wailing, you see? That's the ghadab. That's the first thing that you need to really get a hold of. Because once you bring in the military, until the moment has passed, there is no stability in the nation. We'll get to the section that Ghazali gives as the allegory of governance within the human being. The military arm, and then the administrative political arm, and then the jurisprudence. The 6th chapter is on the methods used to tranquilize fear and panic. The 7th is on the methods of managing sadness and depression. The 8th is on how to ward off obsessions of the chest and the heart, and the harmful or negative inner speech of the soul. And so he says, now in the first section, that was just the brief introduction that he has given here. In the first part of this book, we elucidated the knowledge and the practices required for the sustenance of the body by preserving its well-being when healthy, and reviving it back to health if affected by the symptoms of physical disorder and disease. So as far as the body is concerned, in the first section of the book, the sustenance of the bodies, which he wrote, he said, okay, so there is a mode in which your body is normal, and then you need to maintain that normalcy. So you're healthy and you need to maintain the health of it. And then you get sick, the body gets sick, so you need to now bring it back to health. So there are two parts of your well-being. We also gave a comprehensive representation that informs the reader on how his body can benefit the consumption of healthy food, medicines to perpetuate safety and health. In the second part, we endeavor to give an explanation concerning the sustenance of the soul and how to keep its components in a state of well-being and harmony in order to avoid the psychological symptoms that it may face. We start by saying that since man is composed of a body and soul, he is bound to face from each part of them fitness or weakness, health or sickness, or other symptoms that afflict his health in a negative way. The symptoms that afflict the body and upset its well-being are those such as fever, headaches, various kinds of pains that affect the organs. The psychological symptoms that afflict a person are those such as anger, sorrow, fear, panic, and other similar manifestations. So I spoke about this in the previous session. What transpires in the body will affect the soul. What transpires in the soul will affect the body. And man is two-part, is both body and soul. Is not just body and not just soul. Neither is he a dichotomy of both. He is a union of both. So yes, you have the faculty of the soul, you have the faculty of the body, but you're not a dual entity. So in Islam, we don't believe in duality of existence, even though you've got these two aspects of existence. Because in the resurrection, which is a stipulation of aqidah, of iman, to believe in akhirah, a stipulation of that is to believe in resurrection, and we believe that the resurrection is both in body and soul. So the body is also recreated, the soul is brought back into the body as well. So you are a being that is both of these. One cannot survive without the other, right? So whatever transpires in one will affect the other, whatever transpires in the other will affect the one. These psychological symptoms affect man much more frequently than bodily symptoms. Now that's very interesting from his point of view. These psychological effects will affect the human being more than the bodily problems. Because the bodily problems, yeah, you'll get sick maybe once, twice a year, yeah, you know, or you'll have headaches occasionally. And then a fewer percentage of the population will experience terminal illness or chronic illnesses, right? But as far as psychology is concerned, every human being is going to experience psychological issues every day of his life. And you will have a day, even within the day, in general, like if you reflect back on your day, you'll say it was a nice day, it was a good day, I had fun. But if you break it down, you'll find within that day, you had moments of joy, and then you also had moments of sorrow. But you say that it's a nice day because collectively, when you populate all those events, you will say on average, you had more joyful moments than sorrowful moments. So you had a good day, you see? So every human being is going to experience that. The psychological abnormalities of life within, because as far as that range goes, you always fluctuating. See, when the child is born into this world, is born fitra, but life starts off right then. And life is not tranquility. There's no sound, there's no peace in this world. This world has got no absolute peace. Peace is relative in this world. From the moment that soul is now living, will start experiencing the turbulences of life. And so the soul is always fluctuating. Happy, sad, always fluctuating, you see? And this continues for the rest of the individual's life. Indeed, some people may almost never suffer from any or most bodily symptoms throughout or most of their lives. In contrast, psychological symptoms induce man to suffer from them for most of the time. Indeed, no man is saved in all his conditions from feelings of distress, anger, sadness, or similar psychological symptoms. However, people differ with respect to the intensity of their feelings in response to these symptoms. This is because each person responds according to their temperament. We're going to talk about the temperament theory, inshallah, using Ibn Sina's texts. But your biological composition is composed of 4 universal elements. And modern science likes to say, oh, this is all pseudoscience and it's fake and it's fantasy and all these things. But in general, 4 components: fire, water, earth, and air. And in Chinese tradition, they also included like wood, and other traditions included like metal, because we do have metals in our bodies as well, right? We have some measure of iron and nickel and copper in our bloodstream and all that. But this is in general, and they classified metal and wood to be under earth in any case. So this is in general the 4: fire, water, earth, and air. Now these 4 have got qualities. They've got some attributions that affect the human being depending on how much of a measure is in each individual, which is also depending on what their background, their origin, their genetics are, from which region they've come from, you see. So depending on the balances between these 4, and every individual will experience different degrees of psychological fluctuations. We'll talk about that inshallah later on. And the foundation of his constitution with respect to strength or weakness. So how well they can actually deal with things. So some people are strong, they can deal with more. Some people are weak in that regard, they can deal with much less. And that weakness will be compensated in a different form of strength. So everyone has this, this variance. Some may be quick to become angry, hot-tempered, and some slow. Similarly, some may respond with excessive fear and panic when accosted with fearful things, and some with endurance and courage. And so one can differentiate between the expected responses of, say, women and children. There's a missing word there. It should be responses of, as an example, Abu Zaid was given as an example here, of women and children, and those with weak dispositions in comparison to those with strong natural disposition, because women and children are more prone to emotional turmoil than men and adults. So children and women are women by their nature, and this is not, some whatever, I don't know what words they use nowadays, misogynistic or something like that. It's none of that. Or you see, it's just the nature of the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created human beings. Men are more inclined towards logic, rationality, and women are more prone to emotions. And so this is how when the zawj takes place, when the zawaj takes place, the union between man and woman, they complement each other, you see, because you need both. You need logic and rationality, and then you need feeling and emotion as well to survive in this world. So this is why the union of man and woman complement each other, because the woman supports the aspect of the man in which he is lacking. the feelings and emotions. And the man supports the woman in the aspect that she's lacking in the logic and rationality of things. And children by their nature have not yet developed logic and rationality, particularly between the ages of, I would say, 1 and 7, in the first 7 years of their life. Because the reason, the aqali aspect now begins to come in after 7 and 8, at that age. So at early age, they're riding purely on emotions. And so this becomes makes them have a weak disposition, because remember, the root of all psychological disorder or distress is an epistemological crisis. And epistemology requires logic and rationality to rationalize, the nature of reality that the person is in, and to rationalize the circumstances that they are encountering. So if you can't understand the circumstance you're dealing with, then that puts you in a state of crisis, because you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to get out of it, you see? Anyway, it's a bit of a tangent. Each person will respond according to the degree of their predisposition, whether it is high or low, whether he finds the situation difficult to stand or weak in its effect. So even in general, different people in different parts of the world will respond to circumstances in different ways, you see? So somebody who's living in the city, when he goes to the village and realizes, oh, there's no proper plumbing, they're going to have a hard time dealing with that, right? But then the people in the village, for them, it's normal. That's normal for them. So they're able to deal with it, but this other individual can't deal with that. And the reverse is also true, because life in the village is a bit more slow-paced as compared to the city. And so when the person goes from the village to the city, the person can be overwhelmed by the rapidity of events occurring. For this reason, no man should be heedless of being concerned with the sustenance of his soul, or neglectful in making an effort to shield it from disturbance and anxiety, which leads to an unhappy life. Such psychological symptoms can thus be comparable to bodily symptoms that cause a person pain and illness and result in an agonizing situation. This discussion, the sustenance of the soul, is not generally mentioned by physicians nor documented in their written books on medicine, the sustenance of the body and treatment of its physical ailments. This is because it is a subject not within their professional interest, and because the treatment of psychological symptoms does not match the remedies they give to their patients, such as bloodletting medicine and other similar treatments. I mean, this is what I also mentioned before. This is something that he was seeing happening at his time, which in our age is much more amplified, where you've got physicians and doctors that don't take into account mental health, and they don't even talk about it, and they don't even discuss it, and they don't even go into it. You see, because as he says, it's not in their professional interest. As far as the doctor is concerned, if he wants to make money, he's going to have to figure out a way in which he can sell medicine or increase, he can't just make money out of consultation. And that's the reality of it. If you're in the medical field, if you're heedless about this or oblivious about this, there's something wrong with your intelligence. Wallahi. Because the medical industry is not what it used to be. Doctors nowadays are not doctors the way they used to be. Now they're just technicians, mechanics. I know, I used to be a mechanic. I can tell you that's what mechanics are now. Take the body part out, replace it with something else, or cut it out, or take this pill and that pill and this pill. That's it. That's where they make their money. And that's why the pharmaceutical industry is doing so well, because it's the doctors in the field who are promoting all these medicines and approving them, even though they end up having so many side effects that cause immense problems down the line. Anyway, so he experienced it at that time, and it's something that and he says, however, if you do not take psychological treatment into consideration, and their habitual ways have led to their ignoring it, the approach of adding means for sustenance of soul to the sustenance of bodies is an appropriate, correct one. If you really care about people, and you want to help them, and you want to help heal them and treat them and get them through their lives, you have to take both approaches. You have to consider their physical well-being as well as their mental well-being. And he's speaking on a professional level. See, so he's a scholar and a practitioner, so he's speaking at that level. The PhDs of today don't even match up to that level. So if he's speaking at that level, human sense should say that, we need to take that into consideration. Indeed, it is a much needed approach, therapeutic approach, which can be beneficial due to the interaction between the workings of the soul and those of the body. Man's stamina, and stamina is really the wrong translation here. Man's stamina is a combination of both his body and soul, and one cannot imagine that he can exist without this dual combination, which causes him to act as the human being. Abu Zaid said, فَإِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ إِنَّمَا قِوَامُهُ. That's the word he uses. إِنَّمَا قِوَامُهُ بِنَفْسِهِ وَبَدَنِهِ. That the human being, and qiwam really means like sustenance. It means like consistence or longevity or endurance. Stamina is a bit of a weak word in translation, in my view. What he means is that the longevity of man, the life of man in this world, for the duration that he exists in, is incumbent on both the body and his body and his soul. One cannot exist without the other. And the dual combination which causes him to act as a human being, what makes him a human being is a combination of the two. Because if you look at animals, they also have bodies and souls. And if you look at vegetation, they also have bodies and souls. But what makes an animal different from a human being? They have the same components, but it's how these components work together. It's how the components are joined together. And the same case goes for vegetation. It's how the body and the soul function together that distinguishes this one from the other one. So the human being's soul has been equipped with intellection, and a combination of that, because animals have brains as well, maybe not as well developed as the human being, and they have an agent intellection that is unique to them as well, but the combination of the two is different from the combination of the human being in his power of intellection, and that's what differentiates him and makes him a human being. Al-Hayawan al-Natiq or Al-Hayawan al-Aqil is how the logicians now separate and categorize the human being from the rest of the species, is the speaking animal, which is a sign of intellection, and the rational animal, which is also a sign of intellection. So it's his intelligence, and that intelligence is given by the union of the soul and the body, how the intellect merges with the brain and then regulates the entirety of the being. And when we go into the breakdown of it, inshallah, you'll understand this better. Their combination gives to man his ability to respond to threatening issues and painful symptoms. So when the body becomes ill, is in pain and subjected to harmful things, it will even prevent those with strong disposition from proper understanding and learning and other mental activities or performing duties in a proper manner. And when the soul is afflicted with psychological pain, the body will lose its natural ability to enjoy pleasure and will find its life becoming distressed and disturbed. Not only that, but psychological pain may lead to bodily illnesses. And if this is so, then every person has a real need, particularly those who frequently suffer from harmful psychological symptoms, to know how to deal with them in order to treat them or reduce their harmful effects. And if such a person finds this information in a book alongside other information about how to treat his physical ailments, then he would benefit greatly, as he need not be left to search for treatments in the different books of physicians and scholars of wisdom and religious sermons. It is a great assistance for him to have all this information compiled in one book that he can refer to. What he's saying is, you can observe this. When the body gets ill, you have a problem, psychologically you cannot really deal with your environment. You try to do complex mathematics when you have a fever. It won't work, right? You feel lethargic, you don't want to move forward because the body is ill. And likewise, when you're in a psychological stress or distress, the body is going to suffer. You will manifest inhibitions. You'll get sick frequently, until that stress is resolved. So what he's saying is that if you are able to find all this information in one book, and this is why he wrote it in the two parts, Sustenance of the body and the soul. If you're able to find this, then it's of great benefit, because You don't have to now try to figure out what the doctors are saying in the medical books and then try to combine this with what the psychologists are saying. Or the third thing, which is what most people do, is to now go on YouTube and start watching motivational videos, or listening to 5-minute clips of Mufti so-and-so and Ustad this, that and the other one. You know who I'm talking about, all these like celebrity scholars. They give you these 5-minute intervals of what's a soothing talk, 5-minute Islam or convenience store Islam. It gives you a bit of a boost. That's what he's referring to. Scholars of wisdom and religious sermons. Because you're going there, you'll feel good about it, it will give you a bit of a motivation, but it doesn't help you treat the problem. It doesn't help you diagnose the issue. It just gives you a caressing feeling for a while, you see. And this is what he's saying, this is the reason why I wrote this book, so that it can facilitate for you an understanding of both. And the language he uses in the book is a language for the layperson. It's not a scholarly language. If you understand Arabic and you read the book, you'll understand what he's talking about. There will be technical terms, but for the most part, you'll understand. This is why, if you look at Dr. Malik's translation, it's a very simplified translation. He's not speaking in scholarly terms. Even the technical terms he puts there, he gives you the definitions and the meanings of those. It's to help facilitate you and your understanding. Moreover, it is known that obtaining knowledge with respect to management of a body's sustenance through maintaining its well-being and returning it to health, if this is lost, is not an easy matter. Although many books have been written by physicians detailing this bodily sustenance, it seems that their aim is not to make this knowledge available to the lay reader. And this is what I talked about in the previous session. I think it was the first point that I mentioned, that they make a hegemony and a monopoly of knowledge. They don't want to make it easily accessible to the common man because it's bad for business, right? It's bad if everyone knows how to treat their own symptoms. Then the doctor's clinic is going to be empty. On the contrary, in writing the section of our book on sustenance of the body, we have followed an easy abbreviated style, meaning he is summarized in or abridged style, that takes the form of simple reminders of guidance and advice. As for our section on the sustenance of the soul, we do not know of anybody before us that has written on the subject and explained its contents according to the needs of the reader. On this matter we speak according to our knowledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who grants success. So this is the reason why he's saying I wrote the book. All this was just to explain why he's written the book and why he's made this accessible to everyone. Now we can finish. We have what 15, 20 minutes? Okay, we'll finish inshallah. The human soul can be healthy or unhealthy. So this is the second chapter. I'll go through the second chapter as well. I only wanted to do the first chapter, but we have some time, so I'll go through the second one. The human soul can be healthy or unhealthy in the same way that its body can be healthy or unhealthy. When the soul is healthy, all its faculties will be tranquil, without any psychological symptoms manifesting, such as anger, panic, depression, and others that we have enumerated. This tranquility of the soul is its healthy condition and that of its safety, just as the health of the body and its safety lies in the tranquility and balance of its humors, so that the blood, the yellow, the black bile, the phlegm, this is the four humors which are driven by the four temperaments, or they manifest in the four temperaments, the yellow bile, the black bile, the blood, and the phlegm. And we'll talk about that inshallah later. Are all calm and serene, and none of them overpowers the other. And just as we have stated in the first part concerning the sustenance of the soul of the body, that one must first start by making an effort to preserve and sustain one's health if healthy, then follow this with returning oneself back to health if he loses it. So if you're healthy, maintain your health. Ibn Sina talks about this and gives a more expansive understanding of this as well. And Abu Zaid talks about it in the sustenance of the bodies as well. Things like diet and exercise and all these things as far as maintaining your health goes. And then now diagnosis and medicine, as far as now what went wrong, something has gone off balance, now we need to rectify it. And then the pathology that's involved in diagnosing and figuring out what the disease is and how it transpired. Similarly, for promoting the well-being of the soul, one must start by maintaining its health, if healthy, by securing the serenity of its faculties, which are your shahwa, your ghadab, your aql, or regaining its health if it's lost. So one who wishes to preserve the calmness and harmony of his body should avoid stirring up any of his faculties. You see, you need to maintain the balance that is there, but avoid trying to put yourself in a situation whereby these things are going to be aggravated. And this is an integral construct of our Sharia and Usulul Fiqh. Because if you look at how the Quran presents to you certain prohibitions, the scholars analyze that to say that anything that would ultimately even lead to that is also prohibitory. You see? So if zina is prohibitory, then gazing at a woman is equally prohibitory because it can lead to zina. Because you put yourself in a situation whereby it actually disrupts the normalcy and then ends up putting you on a path from which you might not even have a recovery from. And he says, and in the Arabic text he phrases it very well. An la yahija bihi minha haijun. You know, to not aggravate that which is not aggravated. Don't try to fix a problem that doesn't exist. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it. See, if you've got a certain stability and your environment is good, don't try to bring in or don't attempt to bring in elements that will change that. And this is very profound in Aboriginal people. If you go back, those of you who go back to the village and you try to introduce something innovative in the village, you see, the elders of the village will be very skeptical about it. Some of the young people will be excited by it. It's something new, you know, innovative. But the elders will be very, very, very skeptical. I'm speaking from my own experience when some of the villages that I've been to and some of the people I've spoken to. And they will be skeptical because they will be thinking along the lines of, the village is running smoothly, everything is fine, people are happy, so why do we need to bring in this additional thing that will undoubtedly disrupt the normalcy, the status quo? Why do you need to do that? Like you bring in a proposal which enables them to make more money. You know, like the man who was sitting by the beach, he was just lying down and he had 2 fish on his side. And then the businessman comes and tells him, you only caught 2 fish. And he says, yeah, that's all I need. One I'm going to eat, the other one I'll sell in the market. He says, you know, you've got so much free time, why don't you try and catch more fish? So the man asks him, why do I need to do that? I've got what I needed. And he says, well, if you catch more fish, then, you know, you only eat one, but you can sell the rest in the market. And then he says, why do I need to do that? So he says, well, you'll make more money. He says, why do I need to do that? He says, then you can buy a boat and then you can go further out into the lake and catch even more fish. He says, why do I need to do that? He says, well, you can catch more fish and then sell them and make more money. I says, why do I need that? He says, now you can buy, you know, more boats and you can even hire people to do the fishing for you so you don't have to work. He says, why do I need to do that? He says, so then you can relax. You can kick back and relax. So the fisherman says, well, isn't that exactly what I'm doing right now? I'm relaxed right now. I've got what I needed. Why do I need to upset the normalcy and the soundness that I have right now? You know, that's the concept, that's the thinking. Why do you want to bring in an additional thing just because it looks attractive or just because you can? You know, you've got the money, so why don't I bring it in? Why don't I bring Alexa into my house now so that, you know, the lights can be, you know, I can just say and the lights can be turned on and off. You see, because I can afford it. But then what's the repercussion of it? You have no idea because you're not intellecting. Anyway, different, that's a tangent now. As previously mentioned, the body can preserve its health in 2 ways, external and internal. Protection from external hazards such as extreme heat or cold, other calamities, protection from internal imbalances so that none of the 4 humors overrun the other. This balance can be achieved by modifying one's diet, taking what is beneficial, avoiding what is harmful, as well as employing the other advice mentioned in the first part of the book of the sustenance of the bodies. Likewise, the health of the soul can also be maintained in these two external and internal ways. Externally is to protect the soul from outside elements such as what a person hears or sees that may worry or disturb him, causing arousal of emotions that include anger, panic, sadness, or fear, or other similar aspects. Internally means to protect the soul from internal symptoms of negative thinking about what may harm the person with respect to the symptoms or disorders that we have described. What he means, okay, so Abu Zaid was also the first person to distinguish between 4 different kinds of depression, because it was assumed that depression is general and is the same for everyone. So he distinguished between 4 different kinds. I think Dr. Malik has given some sort of explanation in the introduction. Yes, he has. It's on page 19 for those of you who have the book. So Abu Zaid spoke about a normal depression, which is what everybody encounters. Everyone goes through that. And it's normal. It's normal for you to feel that, you went, to work today and, you have your business or something and, you didn't make that much money. You feel a bit sad. You see, that's normal. That's okay. And then you have endogenous depression and exogenous depression, what is internally inflicted and what comes on from an external aspect. So externalities can be, like I said, like the business thing, you didn't make that, you started a business, first 3 days you did well, and then now for 2 weeks, there's been no business. You see, your circumstances changed a little bit, and that's causing you depression. That's an external thing. Internal thing, it's by your own anguish. You get upset at somebody where it wasn't warranted, and now there's an internal conflict taking place within you between guilt and justification, and that's putting you in a state of depression as well. And then there is reactive depression. Reactive depression is like, it's out of your control. It's not something you could have done, you see. Like as far as the business thing was concerned, you could have done something. Maybe you could have drummed up some business, done some marketing or something and, upped it up a little bit. Or the internal one, you could have controlled yourself, regulated yourself. It was in your control. But the reactive depression is not in your control. Somebody passes away in your life, a loved one, something happens, your shop catches fire, everything gets destroyed or something like that. It's the circumstances beyond your control. And its reason or cause is not really established in the immediate aspect of it. Like in hindsight, you can figure it out later on, but in the immediate aspect, it's not easily. So the reactive depression, I'm not going to look at the others. The reactive depression is clearly caused by an environmental factor involving morbid thoughts and feelings about a real or anticipated loss, stressful event. The reactive, or what was once known as neurotically depressed person, does not suffer from any psychotic symptoms. So it's not because you have a psychological issue or an illness or something is why you're having that depression. It's because of an external factor entirely, and it's not a trait. It's just a behavior that has been incited in you, and you've reacted to it. You see. So somebody's mother might pass away and they might not really react to it. They might deal with it in other ways, but then somebody else, it might hit them very heavily and put them in a state of depression. Such as delusions or hallucinations, nor does he or she lose touch with reality and generally does not need to be hospitalized. His depressive symptoms are milder and can respond to cognitive therapy treatment. If antidepressant drugs are prescribed, they are best taken to enhance cognitive therapy. And antidepressant drugs, I'm not an advocate of drugs, except in special cases where it could actually, especially if it is to do with a bodily trauma, like a chemical imbalance, which even then is tricky to diagnose. So doctors will run tests and they'll see. Like they'll check for serotonin levels in the blood, and then from that they will do other tests to determine if a person can be clinically diagnosed as having depression in this sense. They used to use antidepressants even at that time. I would recommend not to jump on the bandwagon of antidepressant drugs. Because by the way, if you examine the chemistry of some of these drugs and the mannerism in which they are actually processed and how they're even approved by some of these organizations, they actually cause more harm than benefit. Because here's the thing about the soul ultimately gets hooked on. You see, the addictive aspect is highly likely. I mean, even though they'll list and say in their side effects, oh, it's not that, it's less likely to be addictive. You know, if you do a bit of searching, like Oxycontin, for example, when they used to first brought it out and to be administered as a painkiller, you know, they went and brought up all these tests to say, oh, it's not addictive and less likely and this, that, and the other. And then you have a pandemic from that of people getting addicted to Oxy, you see. And the same case applies to antidepressants, because the side effects that result from that is that it makes the soul too dependent on the antidepressant. And that's not to say that a person cannot be depressed because of traumatic experience, physical, biological trauma. It's a possibility, and it can help in that small measure, but not as the prime mode of treatment. That's my position on that. I would rather encourage people to take natural antidepressants, you know, omega-3 fatty acids, nuts, seeds, fish oils, plant oils. There are many things that you can use as natural antidepressants, and activities as well can really benefit in terms of bringing back the balance, because it's just a matter of restoring the internal balance, allowing the body to heal itself so that the brain can function in a normal range, produce the right nervous or neural inhibitors to bring back the balance within the individual. To rely straight away on an antidepressant just because and by the way, I don't know if you've noticed this, those who are in the field of psychology, if you've done like your what do they do? Do you know, like an attachment? What is it? When you finish your like you finish your undergraduate, no, after your thesis, like when your placement, right? Your placement, and you observe how the person, your mentor, whoever the person is, how they actually do the diagnosis. You know, they found, like in the United States, they found that a lot of these doctors, they don't even go through the process of therapy. Even though they have high rates, like per hour charges of therapy, to prolong the number of sessions recommended, they will actually prescribe drugs just to keep the patient coming back to them again. Really, they'll prescribe the drugs to you, and then, your depression hasn't actually gone away, so you come back and say, I'm still feeling depressed. Okay, we're going to have to do another session. I'm still feeling depressed. Okay, we're going to have to do another session. I'm still feeling depressed. We're going to do another session. And it keeps on going. And pretty soon the individual is doing therapy for 2-3 years of their lives. Every week, for 2 hours a week. It's good business. Again, it's good business for them. Anyway, I wanted to just touch on that because what he says, I lost my page. Yeah. What he means now in this case is the internal aspect, is to protect the soul. What he says in Arabic, wal-akhar, let me explain it in the Arabic actually. وَالْآخَرْ أَنَّ التصانى عن الأعراض الداخلة التي هي التفكير فيما يؤديه إلى شيء مما وصفنا من هذه الأعراض فيشغل وينقسم ضميره. It's the tafkir that he's referring to, the thought process. Remember, we said psychology is about an epistemological crisis that needs to be resolved. So the thought process is what you're doing naturally to try and resolve it. Dr. Malik is translated here as negative thinking, but he's doing it just to simplify the language. But what it really means is the progression of thinking. You see? It's to the other thing, which is the internal aspect, is to keep away from those internal symptoms, which is the thinking, the sort of thinking that would lead the individual to some of these symptoms that we described, that وصفنا من هذه الأعراض فيشغل وينقسم ضميره. They preoccupy and they segregate or partition your conscience. They preoccupy and segregate or partition conscience. I'm going to touch on this briefly, very briefly. Can we extend today's time a little bit by an additional 10, maybe 15 minutes? Just a little bit. I want to really touch on this, inshallah. The human the consciousness of the human being has been designed to affirm or negate reality, to affirm true reality and to negate false reality, to affirm truth, negate falsehood. And in the process of learning, the idea behind it is to learn from the particulars and then to universalize them, so that the more universals you understand, the closer and closer it takes you to the ultimate universal or the ultimate unity, which is the unity of God Almighty, because He is the absolute truth, right? And that's Tawheed. That's realization of the unity. So every epistemological process, if it is applied correctly, should lead you to that. The adverse of that, and that's what we would call positive thinking, because the thought now is progressive towards that. A progression towards any other direction, i.e., that is not Siratul Mustaqim. This is the Sirat that leads you to God Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any other progression would be not a progression, it would be a regression. It's going negative now, because it's taking you deeper and deeper into particulars. It's not taking you towards universality, to understand the universal truth, the absolute. It's taking you towards relative matters. This is where you find most of these people. A majority of the academics today are actually on antidepressants. They're seeing psychologists and psychiatrists. And even those psychologists and psychiatrists themselves are seeing other psychologists and psychiatrists. Because even though they have the intellection, they're very smart, they're academically proficient, their direction of learning is not central towards Tawheed. It is in other directions. So this is the negative. I'm talking about this on the higher levels. As far as everyone else, as far as we are concerned, the common man now in this case, it boils down to every other smaller micro aspect of your life. That's why Dr. Malik has put it as negative thinking. Because we are always trying to rationalize our reality. The day-to-day activities that we go through, we're trying to rationalize them. Okay, there's this problem, I need to deal with this, then this is going on, I have to do that, I forgot about this, I need to... So, you see, you want to try and rationalize everything so that you can overcome that and keep moving forward. You want to progress. That's what human consciousness is. And negative thinking is going to preoccupy you with other things. This is where, and Ghazali then talks about this also when he speaks about the Bahaim, the Siba'a and the Shaitan. And he says, فَإِن كُنْتَ مِنْهُمْ فَاشْتَغِلْ بِاشْتِغَالِهِمْ. If this is where you find your delight in what the consumption is, in consuming things and in argumentation and semantic discussions, or in this cunningness and deceit and plotting and planning and strategies, then preoccupy yourself with those preoccupations. Because that is all going to be, that's going to fall on you negatively. It's going to give you damnation, not happiness. You see? This is what Abu Zaid is saying. Avoid those things. Avoid those circumstances that are going to put you in a state of preoccupying yourself with that which does not actually progress you towards realization of the divine presence. And is going to segregate your consciousness, is going to partition you, because that's what particulars do. And particulars will always conflict each other. So if you focus on the particulars, then you will, and the particulars are conflicting with each other, you are equally going to have a conflict within yourself. You see? And a conflict within yourself is a psychological instability. One can heal oneself using two methods. First, when feeling peaceful and when the faculties of the soul are in a tranquil state, one should convince the heart, qalbihi, and Dr. Malik has put mind in brackets, because remember, we're dealing with an epistemological crisis. This is where the mind is involved. That this world, the dunya, has not been created to give people whatever they wish or desire, without their being subjected to anxieties and worries or harmful, unwelcome symptoms. Nothing is free in this world. Even if you can afford it, as far as the money is concerned, the extrinsic value is concerned, it is guaranteed that you will not be able to afford it as far as its intrinsic value is concerned. Because in exchange for the world, you need to give something back in return. And you are a being who has nothing, as far as your existence is concerned, you have nothing that belongs to you except your time. Even your life, your existence, your body, your soul, all these things have been loaned to you. They don't belong to you. The only thing your Creator has given you is time. And that's the only commodity you will be able to exchange. So are you going to trade your time for the niceties and the desires and wants of this world? Because when you dedicate your time to that, the void is going to be, you're going to have a void. And then how do you fill that void? At the cost of your well-being, at the cost of your soundness, your tranquility, your happiness. That's what you're going to exchange it for. One should realize that this internal monologue of convincing him, of self-convincing, this internal dialogue that you're going to have between your heart and your soul. And by the way, and when we go to Ghazali's section, this dialogue is actually between your heart and your intellect. And then from that, your intellect and your shahwa and ghadab. This is the dialogue is internal, the discourse that will take place. That this is the inherent nature of life on this earth, and then this is what one should expect from life in developing one's habits and a regular way of life. Therefore, one should not ask for what has not been created in the very nature of one's world. Don't try to achieve the sky and attempt to fly when it is not in your nature to fly. I'm speaking, I'm not talking about the airplane and everything. I'm speaking just metaphorically. This should be the basic tenet in one's social relations with those who are above, equal, or below one in status. And therefore, one should, as much as one can tolerate, learn to ignore the annoying, is what he said here, anxiety-provoking elements of one's experiences. A person should train himself not to overreact. And in the Arabic, he says, أَن يَظْهَرُ لِكُلِّ صَغِيرٍ مِنَ الْأُمُورِ. And train yourself not to react to the minor incidences or things that you hear and see. Don't just immediately jump on it. He said this. Did you hear what he said? This is where people are. And that's very unfortunate. And by the way, these are the people who are very, if you want to diagnose them, if you want to know who they are, the kinds of people who are highly reactive, most of them are on social media for, a large chunk of their time. They're always online. The phone is always ding, 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 ding. WhatsApp message and this message and that message and notification this and Facebook here. And then you'll find them commenting and arguing and debating left, right and center. They are the first ones to react whenever anything comes up in the news and media. You see, posts and resharing and this, that and the other. This is where their preoccupations are. And this is all a fitna. And the nature of a fitna is to cause a reaction. That's the nature of fitna. It is to preempt reaction. And by the way, the people who are running the show, they know this. They've got the highest, most well-educated psychologists from the best universities in the world working for them. Just so that they can do this. Find out what are the things that will agitate and prompt a reaction from people. All the posts that people do, the sharing and their statuses and, oh, look, I had this for lunch, and all these things that you share, this is information you're giving them. And their algorithms analyze this information to see, oh, okay, so this is what, prompts you. This is what causes you to jump up and down, You see? And then when the fitna occurs, these are the people. Did you hear this what happened? Did you see this is what he said? Can you quickly, I'm sending you the email, I'm giving you all the links. Can you forward it to everybody in your WhatsApp? These are the people. They jump up and down. Otherwise, you never see them. They're never there. They're never there when there are real hardships to deal with in the community. They're never there. But when fitna, they're up and about. They're the first people on the phone. This is how you test them. This is who they are. They are reactive husks. And this is what the world today is meant to produce. The jasads, when we talk about the jasad in eschatology, what is a jasad? It is a lifeless being that just reacts on bodily and carnal aspects of their existence. A person should train himself أن يظهر لكل صغير من الأمور, should train themselves not to react in all these small things that occur in their lives, these affairs that prompt up. He said this and she said that and he looked at me like this and I put 1 spoon and they took 2 spoons and you see how the person and the way he turned his nose away. You have to train yourself not to react to these things. You need to train yourself to increase your spectrum of tolerance. When he trains himself to tolerate these little irritating experiences, this will in time become habitual, meaning he will. You see, this is what training does. If you go to the gym, those who go to the gym, the first time you go to the gym and you try to lift those weights, you can't. It's very difficult, right? You can lift only a certain amount of weights and a certain amount of reps. But then over time, you can lift more and more heavier things and you get stronger so that when you now try to lift those little ones, it's easy. This is what training is supposed to do. So that it makes it easier for you to progress. You see, over time, this will habitualize in you. He will then be able to tolerate things that are more frustrating and experiences that are more annoying. In doing so, he will be analogous to one who gradually trains himself to tolerate the painful effects of a slight increase in temperature, heat or cold, as well as other minor bodily pains without showing impatience or tension until this becomes part of his usual habit. I love this term that Dr. Malik has used here, analogous, because the entrainment that's coming from the New World Order and all their agents is a digital entrainment. And what do I mean by that? In physics, you've got 2 things. You've got analog and then you've got digital, right? So I don't want to get too technical in this. Pulse wave modulation is zeros and ones. This is how computers work, the binary code system. So switch on, switch off. You've got 0 and it's off and 1 when it's on. So it's digital. So you get this sort of a square wave. Now, computers cannot function in analog mode. It's too slow for them. They need to have immediate reaction times. Analog takes its sweet time. This is how radio functions. You see, you've got this wave, this sinal wave that takes place. You've got ups and then downs and then ups and then downs. And so by the time you get to the next up, some time has passed. You see, you want to be analog in this world, in this life. You don't want to be digital. Their entrainment is to train people to become digital. Digital in terms of thinking, not digital in terms of becoming a robot so they can put chips inside of you. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about digital in terms of your thought process. So that ultimately, just as a computer cannot think for itself, you also cannot think for yourself without user input. You have to be given a prompt. Analog is flexible. So long as there is a signal, there is still some feedback you can get, like a microphone, right? So the term that is used is very, very interesting. I like that term. So that you become analog and you're able to adapt, because digital cannot adapt. Digital is set. It's like a box. Analog is more flexible. Bruce Lee said, be like water. You see, any vessel you put water in, it adapts to the shape of the vessel. You see, and water is analog. It's not digital. It's not set. It's not fixed. Right? It's flexible. This will then help him endure the test of greater pain if he were to encounter it. So when the turbulences of this world increase, and they increase for everyone. As a child, you don't realize it that much. As a teenager, you get a bit of a glimpse of it, but you're still hot-headed. You don't realize it that much. As you're crossing over your 20s and just getting into a new life, you still don't realize it that much. But then you get married. And then you start having the first child, and then the second child, and then the third child. And then the first child is growing up, and then the second child is growing up, and this one goes through his phase, and that one goes through his phase. And then your body is also getting weaker. You can't do what you used to be able to do. So the amount of work and how much you can produce becomes more and more difficult. So the turbulences of life start becoming increasingly more difficult. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, use your youth before it goes away from you. Take advantage of your youth before it is taken away from you. Because what you can accomplish in your youth is to entrain yourself to endure for the rest of your life. To expand the spectrum of your tolerance, both physical and mental. This approach is the best way to train the body and is the same approach to train the soul. And this in psychology is called behavioral therapy. Those who know the term, behavioral therapy. It is entraining now until the entrainment becomes a behavior of you behave in that particular way. You change your behavior from a negative thing and you have now a positive behavior. Like praying salah, for example. If you train yourself to pray salah with consistency, ultimately it becomes part of your behavior. So that even if you don't hear the adhan, intuitively you will sense that it is time for prayer. Our people do that, especially when it comes to something like Fajr, for example. They'll wake up and it's Fajr time because it's just intuitive in them. Because of that consistency, it's entrained in them. It's part of their life now. Having said this, it must be noted that any person using this approach to face the problems and difficult experiences which may befall him should be aware of the degree of forbearance which his soul can bear. You need to have an evaluation of your being, of yourself, in order to understand how much you can actually tolerate before taking on. And you can overestimate yourself and you can also underestimate yourself. It is hikmah and wisdom and knowledge that will enable you to evaluate how much you can actually bear. Every individual has a different level of endurance, the strength of his heart or its weakness in facing anxiety, and the breadth of his chest. And as-sadr, he's talking about the spiritual chest, or its constricted nature in facing frustration with patience. So everyone has this. We're going to talk about this inshallah, the sadr, right? Within the sadr, which is the breast, the chest, the heart is in the sadr. You see, the sadr is, depending on how expanded it is or how contracted it is, will determine how much capacity the individual has. And for the Prophet ﷺ, this capacity was really expanded. In the Quran, he says, "Alam nashrah laka sadrak." Did we not expand for you your breast so that you could encompass more? And the Prophet ﷺ had the greatest of forbearance. The greatest of forbearance. One of the Jews came to test him. And he tried this test and that test and that test, and every test he passed, the Prophet. And then he started insulting him. He started calling him names. The Sahaba were getting upset. They were getting angry. But the Prophet was calm, tranquil. He did not react even the slightest, not even like a small twitch or, like a twitch on the temple, even that sort of reaction. He was calm. And the Jew said, this is the only test that I wanted to establish before I believe. And he accepted. He took his shahada. I wanted to see this test as a mark of a true prophet of God, whether or not you have the forbearance. You see, that's a very high level. We're going to talk about prophetic intelligence, inshallah. It's a very high level of endurance and the capacity with which a person can actually absorb and maintain. So some can withstand great calamities without being stirred up and are able to continuously deal with each problem and treat it to reduce its harmful effects by trying different methods. Some, however, are traumatized or succumb to the slightest emotional provocation, consequently losing their ability to reduce tension or solve the problem they are faced with by recourse or to available methods. This could even lead them to develop a bodily disorder. If you're not able to deal with it, and you don't have the ability, and the ability, by the way, human beings have got ability and potentiality. Everyone has an ability and then has a potentiality. So everyone has different types of abilities. Some people are able to do certain things, but that does not mean that they don't have the potential to do them. It just needs to be activated. It just needs to be ignited, brought out in them, right? So some people have a talent for drawing. That's their ability. That doesn't mean other people cannot draw or do art. It's there in them. They just need to ignite it, to activate it. They need to learn something about it and practice on it. If you don't have that, ultimately it's going to manifest into a bodily disorder. And people who are facing things like epilepsy, especially epilepsy, a majority of the cause of epileptic seizures is a psychological disorder. It's a psychological, if you solve the psychological aspect, you solve the epileptic aspect, the bodily manifestation of it. But unfortunately, most of the treatment that's done is medicinal. They just give them, pills and to try and curb but the epilepsy is a symptom. It's a symptom that there's something wrong internally. There's an imbalance taking place as far as the soul is concerned. Anything that you see manifesting in the body, unless it is a disease caused by an external factor or a trauma, like you got hit or something, or you got cut, unless it's that, it's a symptom of a psychological disorder, which you need to examine and rectify that in order to rectify what's manifesting in the external. If a person comes to know the nature of his soul and the degree to which it can tolerate stress in dealing with problems, he can then decide based on this knowledge what kinds of problems he is ready to face and what problems he should avoid. This principle is applicable to all, whether king or commoner. Every individual needs to know the nature of their soul, needs to understand what their capacity is, what are their potentialities, what are their abilities, how best to cultivate both. Where do their weaknesses lie? Some people are ghadabi, some people are shahwani, some people are aqili. You see, aqili is also dangerous. In fact, it's more dangerous than shahwa and ghadab. You need to understand where you are and you need to be honest with yourself. You cannot justify to yourself, I like these things just because, no, you can't do that because you're just lying to yourself and you're going to misdiagnose yourself and you're never going to treat the problem. If one finds that one is strong enough to face great problems which would normally cause others much trouble and anxiety, then one can proceed to bravely confront them. If on the other hand one realizes that they may be too much for one's weak disposition, then one should keep away from them, even if this results in deprivation of certain pleasures and anticipated wishes. If you cannot deal with that, don't go into it. Even if it means that you will deprive yourself of what might come from it. There might be some benefit from that. Worldly benefits, like in fulfillment of your wishes or your desires. But if you cannot fulfill that, if you evaluate yourself correctly and you see that you cannot actually deal with that, it's better not to go into it because it is going to lead you down the drain. It is going to incapacitate you. To be deprived of expected pleasures. There should be a comma there. I don't know why they missed that. To be deprived of expected pleasures, if this means maintenance of the body, of the soul's tranquility, is far better than confronting what one cannot tolerate. Choosing to confront ordeals of this type would certainly cause much anxiety and distress, which may result in an emotional or even physical disorder of the body. However, wisely steering clear of what one cannot endure will lead to a peaceful life, a healthy soul, and real worldly happiness. This is why I wanted to speak about these two chapters, because this is what now Ghazali begins with. The Kimya as-Sa'ada, the alchemy of happiness, both in this world and in the hereafter, begins with knowing yourself. That's the first question he asks. He says, if you want happiness, you need to first understand who you are. So this is what we are going to, inshallah, start off with next week. I think we can take a break here. I went a little bit overboard. That's okay, inshallah. Let's take a quick break and meet back in 5 minutes. I want to have something to drink. And actually, what's the time? Is it Maghrib for us? Yeah, okay, let's take a 10-minute break. I want to pray Maghrib and then we'll meet back, inshallah. And then we'll have a discussion. Jazakumullah khairan, jazakallah. See everyone in a few minutes. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulihil ameen. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's proceed it, inshallah, if everyone is in. Questions? I have questions. Those you can just write down your questions and they'll be passed forward to me. If you don't want to speak out, that's fine. Now, anyone on the Zoom? If not, I can maybe start reading this.
So there are some questions on the chat window. I don't know if you can see them.
I think they'll be written down for me and they'll be passed forward as well, inshallah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I don't know if this is from the Zoom as well. What if external individual is causing stress, anxiety, upset, like a relative or boss or colleague or spouse, etc.? This is a bit more complicated. It's a bit more not complicated, sophisticated to respond to, because you would have to really evaluate for yourself how much importance an individual is to be given, and whether or not you should continue to tolerate them. See, so some people will have they'll have a boss at work who's just really breathing down their necks. And it's causing them anxiety, it's causing them stress day to day, but the job is an important one for them. You see, it's the only source of livelihood, and so they will try as much as they can to tolerate it. I had a boss like that. I couldn't tolerate the guy. 2 weeks after joining the company, it was a nightmare for me. And then 3 months later, I just resigned. I could, and that's the reason I gave him my resignation. They didn't like it. They actually thought I was insulting, but I said, if you can't handle the truth, I'm sorry, you don't even deserve to be in business, because you're just manipulating your workers. This is how you treat people. You expect loyalty from them. Anyway, I ended up just resigning that. So everyone has a different way of evaluation. Even as far as family is concerned, family is the biggest sort of burden in that regard. Because, like they say, you can't choose your family. You can't just cut off ties with somebody just because you don't like their face. And some level of tolerance is expected of every individual, especially when family gets together. So, you have to evaluate it for yourself. But if you can avoid getting into those things, because this is where your intellection really comes, really is put to the test. Because it is for you to evaluate, first of all, what is it that's actually causing an issue between the two of you. Because it could be just something that the other person doesn't like about you, and not necessarily what you don't like about them. And then and that's just a reaction they're having towards you. So it could be something that, if you rectify within yourself, then it automatically resolves the problem as far as the other person is concerned. And this is typical between spousal relations, between husband and wife, because it's a dual entity in this case, So there are certain things that the wife will definitely not like about the husband, and there are certain things the husband will definitely not like about the wife that irritate each other. It pushes each other's buttons. So it's important for each one to evaluate and say, maybe it's something I'm doing that's prompting a reaction from the other person. And then you rectify it within yourself, and then immediately the reaction from the other side becomes positive. Coming into dialogue is one of the things that can help, bring an end to conflict and finding resolution. This is what couples counseling is really about. It's not all that to help resolve marriage issues, but it does help bringing out some dialogue between the two to say, I don't like this and I don't like that. Okay, I can change that. I can rectify this. Many a times the people, and this is the thing, the self, intelligence regulates the volitions of the self. That's what intellection does. Intelligence is meant to regulate the volitions of the self, because the self is a politicking entity. It politics. This is why people get very, excited when politics takes place, especially between family politics. They get excited. They like the drama, because that's what the self gets hooked onto. Alakwanu, Ibn Ata'illah said, Alakwanu dhahiruha zina wa batinuha ibra والنفس تنظر إلى ظاهر زينتها والقلب ينظر إلى باطن عبراتها. The self is affixed on the outward and the mundane, and politics is a mundane field. It's a mundane, it's an integral part of human relations, whether as far as the community is concerned, the nation is concerned, civilization is concerned, even as far as the family is concerned. So righteous politics, or doing it the right way, is a matter of intellection. When you apply intelligence, then you are able to distinguish, okay, I can understand this individual now. I know where they're reacting from, how they're acting, what are the things. And then you can apply hikmah to try and guide them in that way, to handle them. If a person by their very nature is argumentative and you understand that, then the natural conclusion is not to get into an argument with them. You see? You just, okay, fine, you're right, go ahead. And everyone has such a person in their life. It could be an aunt, it could be an uncle, it could be an in-law, it could be a cousin, it could even be your siblings. Now, another question? Bismillah. Okay, so are souls of different types? Is the soul of the human the same as Jibril alayhi salam? Does an animal have the same soul as a plant? Every creature, I said this before, every creature has a soul. Everything in creation has a soul, has an ethereal nature to them, has an ethereal aspect. That's a soul, that's ether, right? So you've got matter, and then you've got ether, and then you've got spirit. You've got al-jism, al-nafsu, wal-ruhu. And so that's the bodily, the ethereal, and then the spiritual. So every part of creation has that, but every group or species has it in a different way, as a different composition. So animal souls are different from human souls, different from vegetative souls, different from the angelic souls, right? So yes, Jibril alayhi salam and all the angels, they also have souls, and their souls are of a different composition. Their souls do not have the carnality of the human being and the animal world. So they don't have concupiscence, and irascibility are not from their mannerisms. And Ghazali talks about this, inshallah. We'll come to that section. Does free will stem from the body, soul, or a combination of the two? Neither of those. Free will does not come from the body, and it does not come from the soul. Free will comes from the heart. The will has been assembled in the heart along with consciousness and deep intellection and deep emotion, which is different from the intellection and emotion of the soul. So there is the outward intellection, which comes outward towards the world and sensoria, and then there are emotions that are associated with that. And then there is an inner emotion as well, which is transcendental. This would be like, for example, in the Quran, you will find the terminology used, and the translations will say heart, right? Like fu'ad, for example. Fu'ad, you'll see the translations will say heart, but it's really a heart that is inflamed with emotion, and that kind of emotion is a transcendental emotion. It's not bodily, it's not outwardly, it's deep down inside, right? And then you've got lub. Lub is another term that is translated as heart as well, but lub is a deep level of intellection. You see, so those are part of the inner dimension of the being. That's where you have the will, because the will works in tandem with consciousness. For the will to be executed, the heart needs to know whether a thing is or isn't. You see, affirmation or negation. So for you to submit to one God, there is an affirmation, there's a negation and then an affirmation, and then combined with the two, you then because then once you combine the two, rationality is established, and that rationality transcends the outward to penetrate the heart, so that the will can willingly submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what free will is, by the way. Free will is not what they describe. For them, free will is in the outward regard. But free will in Islam is a will that can become free. The will is not inherently free, because there are certain parameters in which the human being can operate within this world. Like, you can't fly if you wanted to. Even if I will, I say I have the will to fly. I can't fly. I cannot sprout wings and start flapping them. You see, there are parameters within which there is some sort of operation. that is allowed for the human being. But the will has been designed to become free. So when we do the section on the lives of man and go through this whole, this whole spectrum of existence of the human, you'll understand what it means to be and then to become, right? Kun fayakun, to be as a creation, and then to become what the creation was intended to be, and it was intended to become free. And so that freedom is to be freed of everything else. Because al-hurru abdun ma tama' wal-abdu hurru ma qana'. The free man is a slave so long as he's greedy, and the slave is free so long as he's not covetous. So even though you're a slave, like you're Abdullah, when you submit to Allah, you submit your will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're a slave of Allah. But then what does that do to you in relation to everything else? It frees you from everything else. That's what free will entails in Islam. Does free will lead to depression? That's the second thing. If you regard free will as what they regard it as what their philosophies tell you is free will. Yes, if you regard it as that, yes, it will lead you to depression, for sure. Because their ideology is to do whatever you will, in terms of do whatever your soul wills, not whatever your heart wills. Because the natural disposition of the heart is willed towards submission to one God. That's what the heart is looking for. That's where it finds its contentment. But then, and this is a line of poetry in my book, The Crucible of Abstinence, and one of the lines I've written there, dreams are shattered when the soul politics against the will of the heart. Right? Dreams are shattered when the soul politics against the will of the heart. So when your dreams are shattered, that will put you in a state of depression. And that happens when the soul is politicking against what the will of the heart is. The will of the soul is overriding the will of the heart. That's their free will. And it will definitely lead you to depression. Can an angel feel depressed? Not in the same way that you would say a human being would feel depressed. They do have emotion, for sure. They will feel sadness, especially when they observe humanity, and humanity is, going against what the will of Allah is, especially when humanity is like destroying creation. Yes, they do feel oppressed. I mean, they do feel that depression. But this is not the same depression as what we are using in the common tongue as far as depression is concerned. Right? This is something of a different. We're talking about depression as far as human nature is concerned. It's not the same depression as far as other entities are concerned. The Quran was not sent down on paper. Yes, correct. So what does it mean for the Prophet ﷺ to read? Iqra. The term in the Quran, in the surah, Iqra, has got three meanings. It's just not just one meaning. And unfortunately, the translations take the outward meaning. And it's okay to do that, because aslul lugha haqiqa. The source of language is to first look at the literal, the most outward, the most dahiri meaning, before you go into the more deeper meanings. But it's got three meanings. Iqra. Iqra means to read. Iqra also means to recite. And then Iqra also means to convey, to deliver. So the Arabs would say something like, Aqrahu minni salam. Convey to him my salam from me, or salam from me. Aqra'ahu, convey to him, aqra'ahu minni, from me, as-salam. Assalamu alaikum. Right? And if you look at the hadith, Jibreel asks him the same question 3 times. And each time he gives the same response. But in the metaphysics of understanding the language, all 3 responses are different. The first one is Iqra, read. And he says, Ma ana biqari, I cannot read. And then the second one is Iqra, recite, because the Arabs used to recite poetry, but they would not recite from paper like this, like the way I'm doing it with the book and stuff, to read there and then to recite it. No, this was like a recital. If you've ever been to a poetry recital, they actually speak out. There's an expression, elocution that goes with it. eloquence that goes with it. This is what the Prophet said, Ma ana biqari, I don't know how to recite, because he was not indulged in poetry. Poetry was not something, he liked poetry, he liked poetry, but he was not a poet. He wasn't somebody who would sit down and write lines and then give them out. And this is something that, like the West tried to use against the Prophet. Oh, he just made up the Quran because, it's just lines of poetry, so he just wrote down poetry. He wasn't a poet, which really, separates him from any allegation that he wrote the Quran, because the Quran fulfills all the metrics and rules of poetry in the Arabic sciences. And he wasn't a poet, so how did he write that? Anyway, the third time he asks him, Iqra, and he says, Ma ana biqari. Meaning convey, and says, I'm not a conveyor, because he was not a public speaker. He wasn't one of those people who used to go out in the street and then they would deliver part of poetry side, but they would also give stories and they would deliver speeches. He wasn't that. In psychologically, he was in the initial stages of his prophethood. He was an introvert. That was his nature. He wasn't an extrovert. He was reserved. He preferred to be in isolation. And this is where the commandment comes to him to go out. Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir. O you who is shrouded, rise up, stand up, and warn them. You see, the Quran prompts him to now come out and be among the people, walk in the marketplace. You see, so he wasn't that either. So it carries all three meanings. It doesn't just mean to read. And yes, the Quran was not delivered on paper. It was sent down. As a speech. And this is why it's called the speech of Allah, Kalamullah. It's not the inscription. The inscription came later. In the initial, it came in the form of speech. When revelation first came to the Prophet, he was squeezed 3 times, after which he was able to read. Could it be said that the neurosis of the Prophet was impacted through physical trauma, which then gave him the ability to read? Okay, so there's 2 questions. No, I would not say that, because it wasn't the physical experience that he went through. See, an experience with an angel is a spiritual experience. It's not a physical experience. It's not about the physical squeezing. That's not what it was. It wasn't a physical trauma. It was a spiritual trauma. And when he spoke to Waraqa after that, it was, and this is also in Christian tradition, by the way, an experience with the jinn, with shayateen, is actually a pleasant experience. It's very interesting. An experience with the shayateen is a very pleasant experience, but it has an incredibly negative consequence, a dire consequence after that. But an experience with an angelic entity in the initial aspect is a traumatic experience. It's frightening because it's true reality. What the jinn show you is a false reality. It's a delusion. It's meant to draw you in. But the angelic experience is it's meant to warn you. It's meant to awaken you. You see, and that awakening, when you actually experience it, that awakening, it can shake you up. That's what he experienced. You see, and then later on, you find that Jibril and the Prophet ﷺ, they actually become very good friends. And it's very interesting because Waraqa also told him, Hada namus. This is the confidant of the prophets. This is the entity who was sent to Musa. And he's the one to whom all the prophets confide in and trust in. And he's the one who delivers to them the divine speech. And so they become, in the first meeting, it's sort of a clash, but then its consequences are positive consequences down the line. Does bearing with trials help a person to overcome neurosis and help a person adapt to change? Yes, it does. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in your path, but then He doesn't put in your path a burden that you cannot bear, right? What's the ayah? Subhanallah, I'm spacing out now because I'm tired. He does not give a soul any more than لا يكلف الله نفسا لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. He does not burden a soul, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any more than it can bear. You see, so He does put trial, and life itself is a trial. In my book, The One-Eyed Impostor, in I think the second chapter, I broke down the meaning of trial and the meaning of tribulation, although in context it's with regards to the age of fitan and the Dajjal, but the concept is the same, it's universal. The trial affects the intellection of the individual. The tribulation comes after that and burdens the heart. That's why they come together, trials and tribulations. But it's put in your path so that you can overcome it. And life itself and everything in this worldly life is a tribulation. That's why he uses the word zina, right? No? Yeah, an allure. I'm trying to remember the ayah in Surah Al-Kahf. I'm really spacing. I'm very tired. Everything in this world, مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Everything is a zina in this worldly life. It's an allure. And zina, this is where the word zina also comes from. It's because of the allure, the attraction, the sexual intimate attraction that one feels towards another. And then it ends up being an illegitimate deed that is performed and it becomes blameworthy. That's what it does. That's the ultimate allure, you see. And that's a tribulation, that's a trial on the human being's sexual aspect. A tribulation on the human being's sexual aspect, a trial to see whether chastity and abstinence can be applied, to see who is best of them in action. And so yes, it can help you overcome any form of neurosis that you're facing, because ultimately what does not kill you only makes you stronger. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting the trial in your path is not to see you suffer. It is to give you the opportunity to advance, to progress, so that when you then reflect and you look back and say, I've done this, I've done that, I can handle this, right? You see, I went through this, we went through that, we can deal with whatever's coming up next. It increases your capacity to tolerate and adapt. That's what neurosis is. It's the inability to adapt. And so facing the trial that is in your path, rather than avoiding it, people they try to avoid it. Or they'll go to somebody else and look for a quick fix. Help me solve my problems. That's a wrong move. Ask for assistance, ask for advice, but don't let other people solve your problems for you, because you're just going to incapacitate yourself. You see, you're not going to move forward. Next time you have the same problem or something similar, where are you going to go look for somebody else to help you fix the problem? Anyway. All of the body illnesses, lack of oxygen, are a result of the neurosis, where the body burns immense oxygen, which is the most important source, right? And the body gets sick slowly or immediately, but for the reverse side effects, body heals itself when one is in tranquility, happiness state. Therefore, how to control the neurosis, how to control the nerves to avoid bad results for the body. Inshallah, when we come to Ghazali's texts, you will really understand this better, the howness of it. That's what the alchemy is designed to do. It's to give you the howness of it. It's how do you actually put yourself in a state whereby you can identify the issue, identify the problem you're facing, and then what steps to now take. Because the first step is in identifying the problem. Unless you do that, you won't be able to move forward. What's the issue? And once you start identifying the issue, you begin to evaluate, is it a big issue? Is it a small issue? If it's a small issue, as Abu Zaid said, avoid it, ignore it. Ignore these small petty issues. They're going to keep you preoccupied, and just segregate your thoughts. If it's a major issue that requires attention, then you can dedicate time and effort. And this is what I also talk about, like I mentioned about the conspiracy theories last week. You see, the nature of a conspiracy theory is it's very alluring to the mind, to the intellect. It's very attractive because, you now have a problem to solve, and you've got certain variables that you feel like you can put into an equation and come up with the solution. But the problem is that the nature of that domain is semantic and particular. It's segregated. And seldom will you find the link, because the nexus, the causal nexus, is not something tangible that you can't see the physical link. You can only establish some sort of correlation or causation between things. And a mind that is active in that domain will always be in turbulence. And when the mind is in turbulence, it is unable to regulate the internal faculties of the being, the what's required, the desires that are required, the appetites that need to be fulfilled, and then the other issues that need to be resolved. Because you do need to get angry in certain instincts, in certain instances. You do need to react in certain instances. How do you regulate that? That person will not be able to evaluate that, and so will not be able to actually deal with the problem that's ahead of them. And if they cannot deal with the problem, they cannot solve that problem, they will not be able to reflect on it to then increase their capacity to deal with the next problem, and then the next problem, and the next problem. So it becomes just a recurring thing. The same cyclical effect takes place, and it just keeps on depleting them. Their neurosis will get worse. It won't get better. How to control the thoughts and the body through thoughts. Same thing. We'll talk about this in the Kimia. I want to take it systematically. I don't want to give you a broken response in that. But how to control thoughts, that's what internal governance is about. Because thoughts can go in different directions. Really, thoughts can just go haywire. And you can end up going into a train of thought that you don't realize is actually causing you more fatigue, mental fatigue, than is actually solving your problem for you. And a lot of people get caught up in pettiness, in petty thinking, especially speculative aspects. To speculate on something that you either have no knowledge of or you have got no estimation of. Where is it actually leading you in your train of thought? And that's to do with epistemology. If you understand epistemology and how it works, the epistemology of Islam and how it works, it can actually help you regulate. For example, in the Quran, you see the most profound example of going the wrong direction when looking for harmony in so far as knowledge is concerned, in between Musa and Al-Khadr. And you see that when he's going out to look for Majma' al-Bahrain, where the two oceans converge and there's harmony of knowing, of episteme, when he crosses the boundary or the point that he's supposed to arrive at, he starts feeling fatigued, right? And then he actually says, now the journey is becoming too much for me to bear. And then, they realize, oh, we missed the sign, right? So then they start retracing their steps back and they find Majma' al-Bahrain. And then the episteme and the progression of thought and understanding takes a different route altogether. And now he's learning more. You see, he's advancing. Anyway, I don't want to go into that too much right now. We don't have much time. Are these all the questions? There's no more? Okay. Is there anyone else, like from the general audience? No, no questions. Everyone wrote down their question. Okay, khair. If there's no any question or comment or thoughts, we can end for today, inshallah. I'm sorry I had to rush through the session today because I didn't actually time it. Go ahead. Yeah, there's a question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Ustad, last week you talked about emotions. So I came across this ayah in Surah Sajda, and it's mentioned many times in the Quran. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. So what is this term أَفْئِدَةَ?
Af'ida is to do, yeah. Af'ida, this is what I mentioned, the fu'ad. It's to do with their hearts. That's the deep set emotion. That's the inner that's the heart that's inflamed with emotion. Or the intellection of the heart has been overcome by the emotion that's inflamed in the heart.
Is it the aspect that is connected to the spiritual world?
Yes. Those are the emotions that are more spiritual in nature and not reactive emotions. You see, so anger, for example, there's two types of anger. There is reactive anger, and then there's what you would call righteous anger. Like if you see somebody, if somebody is oppressing somebody else who is innocent, then getting angry towards them, that would be a righteous anger, because you want to establish justice there, right? But then if somebody just comes and says something to you, which in hindsight would be a petty thing, and you get angry and you punch them and you beat them and you shout and you argue, like that's an anger that's reactive. So that's a blame. That's now the anger of the soul. But then the other one is the anger of the heart. That's a righteous. Now that's what the fu'ad would be. So you will see with Ummi Musa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says her fu'ad was very much inflamed, because she was seeing her son being picked up by somebody else in a circumstance that was entirely not in her control. It was a necessity that she had to do that, to put her son in a basket and just leave him to go into the river, not knowing what's going to happen next, because Fir'aun wanted to kill all that. So it was not in her control. And then she's observing and she's seeing another woman picking up her son from the basket. Now you have to think, if you're a mother, you need to realize what is going on in her heart. You see, it's not got nothing to do with the rationality of it. And it's not a reactive emotion. It is a deep felt emotion for a mother and her child. See, but as far as this world is concerned, this worldly life is concerned, those inflamed emotions are not useful in this world. They're not useful insofar as, because this world is a world of causality and rationality. You don't want inflamed emotions making the decisions for you. And this is why he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we strengthened her heart with iman, so that she would then become among the mu'mineen, those who have faith and trust in Allah's decision as to doing that. Because her emotions would have caused problems. In that moment, the person has to still the emotion. But the heart can be inflamed with emotion. They have to still their emotion and apply rationality. So the rational aspect has to override the emotional aspect. The heart has to control itself and allow the intellect to do its job, to get out of the circumstance. Otherwise, what's going to happen, if the heart is weakened or inflamed by that emotion, then the heart will no longer be able to regulate the intellect. And if it can't do that, the intellect will not be able to regulate the volitions of the self. So the individual is going to end up reacting, and that will prompt negative consequences. When we get into Ghazali's text and he explains these faculties and how they come together, the hierarchy and the order of sound governance within the human being, you'll understand better how this works, how this equation works. Go ahead, Roshan. Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
You said the heart regulates the intellect. How does that go? Because, for example, the intellect is usually associated with the mind, and if the heart is regulating the intellect, does it mean that the heart is regulating the mind in regards to the ghadab and the shahwa? And you mentioned also that there are 4 components of an individual: fire, water, earth, and air. How does those 4 components affect the intellect of a person?
Okay, so for the first question, we're referring to the spiritual heart, not the physical organ. And Ghazali explains, he makes that clarification. He's not referring to the physical organ, which is the fleshy, which, by the way, as far as the physiology of the being is concerned, the heart actually takes precedence, the physical heart takes precedence over the brain. Even, this is something that they've now begun to understand much more recently. that even in the womb, the heart develops before even the brain is developed and is already beating. And they've also found that the physical heart has got more neural connections. It has its own nervous system and with more neural connections than the physical brain, the physical heart. What we're referring to here in this case is the inner dimension, the spiritual heart, al-qalb, right? And mind and intellect are synonymous, but they have their application in language. So the heart controls the mind because the will and consciousness is in the heart. The mind is now its instrument of interpreting reality. The mind has access to the brain. The brain has access to the senses. So the senses receive information, they go to the brain. The mind interprets them, or the intellect interprets what the senses have received and then delivers it to the heart so that the heart can make a decision as to what is required. And that's where the will comes in, the will to do, the will to act, the will to enact. That's what we're talking about, the spiritual heart. But when we come to that section of Ghazali, he'll explain it in much detail. Take it in its stride, inshallah. Now, sorry, your second question was about the 4 elements, right? And how do they pertain the heart? Those 4 elements are with regards to the material composition of the body. The material composition of the body is made of these four elements. That's matter. Matter is made from element. So matter originates from element. This is going into now a much different science altogether. Matter is made from element. Ether is made from essence. And then you have spirit, which comes from light. That's essentially how the categorization would be. So matter comes from element. Ether, which is what the soul is made of, comes from essence. And then the spirit comes from nur, it comes from light. The 4 elements pertain the composition of the body. How much and in what, this is alchemy now. We're talking about alchemy, real alchemy, like what we would call chemistry now. So in today's chemistry, you've got all these other elements that have been derived from all these 4. So you have the periodic table of elements, have different molecular and atomic configurations that derive from these elements, depending on which one is, built how, with what, how much of each ingredient and how it's fused together, determines the nature of the body in this case. And then the mind has access to that body or the brain. So for some people, they'll have, let's say, too much heat in them. They'll tend to be a lot more temperamental, hot-tempered. They will react immediately because that's part of and so for them the ghadab aspect will be more activated in the soul because the body is more activated in terms of heat. To counter that, medicinally, you would take something that has a cooling effect as far as the body is concerned. Like the Prophet ﷺ, for example, used to eat dates with cucumber. And he said, "Hada yubarridu hada." This cools the other one. Because cucumber has a cooling effect, dates have a heating effect. They increase the heat and the temperature of the body internally. You see, so one counters the other. And or some people will be moist instead of dry, and so they will have a more, cold or reserved sort of a nature. Well, when we go to Ibn Sina's texts about the temperaments, you'll understand better this classification. We don't have the time right now to go into it, inshallah. Any other question, any remarks? If not, we can maybe end for today. We have actually gone, I think, half an hour? 1 hour. 1 hour above our time limit. Inshallah. Okay, so let's end for today, inshallah. So next week, inshallah, I'm going to start with Ghazali's text. So if you haven't, please write down the text so that you can better follow along. I was told that there was a bit of confusion as to how you should write down the text. It's actually very simple. You can write it down in flowing text, like you can just write the Arabic line by line continuously. I wouldn't recommend that unless you understand Arabic itself. If you don't, write it down the way I have compiled it for you in the PDF. But don't write down my translation. That's all I'm saying. Write down each line, sentence, and then leave a gap so that you can put down the translation when we discuss it in class. I would rather you understand the Arabic than to focus too much on the translation of it, right? And then each section you will see there, faslu ma haqiqatul qalb. Fasl is a section or a chapter. So on the reality of the heart, each section you can leave a page or a page and a half after that for some notes and explanations after that. But write down the text so that we can get started. It will be better. This is how I studied with my teachers. I write down the text, and then when they are explaining the text, I don't look at them, I look at the text so that I can see the word and the sound he's making and the explanation he's giving as far as that word is concerned. You see, that's the benefit of that. Plus, writing it down beforehand will also familiarize yourself, will help you familiarize the text. So you're not seeing it for the first time in class. It's a sort of a pre-review, right? Or a preview. Inshallah. Okay. Jazakallah khairan. Let's end here, inshallah. Subhanaka wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayka. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta samiun alim wa tub alayna ya maulana innaka anta tawwabur rahim. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Jazakallah. See everyone next week, inshallah.